So I get to introduce Valerie Cleland. This is pretty exciting for me. I got to know, so I became director in 2010, and she started in the environmental studies program in 2011. So I feel like she was part of the rebirth of the environmental studies program. And I got to have her in classes, and she worked as an intern in the office, and like many students, she was trying to figure out where does she fit in the world of the environment. And so she ended up doing some bio at the beginning, and then she did some environmental studies and some international relations. In the end of the day, she settled on sort of finding a link between environmental studies and international relations. And she graduated in 2015. And during that time, she'll probably tell you about some of the things that she did in the interim, but she was from Seattle, which also I'm from Seattle. So there was a connection. She's from Mercer Island. I was from the north end of the lake. Anyway, so she ended up moving back to Seattle and had a couple part-time jobs. She was very active in the Tufts Wilderness organization, and did a lot of training. She worked with a nonprofit that helped train high school students she did climbing exercises at REI. But she always had this light on, I want to be able to make a difference in the environment. So she did a master's program at the University of Washington. And while there, one of the things that really struck me in one of our conversations while she was a master's student was that she was she worked on the issues of the Arctic. And she was really determined to sort of like, if I'm going to work on the Arctic, I want to try to understand the language of the communities that I'm going to work with. So she actually spent the time to learn Inuktitut language while she was a graduate student to sort of facilitate her work in that. So she got exposed to lots of law, she got exposed to policy, she got exposed to the issues that both from the perspective of the people making policy and the interactions with the local communities that those policies might affect. And so she's really what I would call, maybe she'd never put this word to it, a true systems thinker in the environment, where she's trying to find all these linkages between the different organizations. And so when she got a Canals Fellowship, which is this sort of federal fellowship to work in DC, that ended up that experience also working in the government allowed her to transition to her current position in the Natural Resources Defense Council. And she was the first student who took my tropical ecology course who was determined to link people and the environment and biology. And now it's become something that a lot of our students in that class are super interested in doing. How do we do coupled natural human systems? So she's going to tell us a little bit about sort of trying to couple the human and the natural in today's talk. And I'm so glad that you came back. Welcome back to Tufts.
That was such a kind introduction. Thank you, Colin. I'm really excited to be here. So also want to thank you all for having me here. Valerie Cleland, I use she, her pronouns. And it's a really big treat to be back at Tufts. And the topic for today is about the Blake Plateau. But first, I'm going to share sort of a little about my journey. Colin previewed a little of it. So I dug up some old photos to sort of help illustrate sort of what happened at Tufts, post-Tufts to where I am now. I graduated in 2015, so I'm coming up on a decade post-Tufts. So at Tufts, I studied environmental studies and international relations. And just gonna move this. Though I confess, I started off as a biology major. Oh, there's my family. And as a biology major at Tufts, I was failing organic chemistry. I was bad at it. And this is an important piece of my story because it was the question that my advisor, Dr. Oriens, asked me while I was in tears about failing chemistry and my future as a marine biologist. He asked me what I was good at, because it clearly was not chemistry. But that sort of question that I encourage all of you to ask of yourselves is sort of, what is it that you are uniquely good at? And being able to look at the overlap between your skills and your passion was where I sort of began to see what that future was. And it really was on the border of science and policy. Oop, it's not liking it. Uh-oh. I'll let her figure, I'll keep talking. So at Tufts, I was always torn between science and policy and became particularly enamored with the conservation side of things. Oh, there we go. These are from the Bio 181 class. And I sort of had these, I still had these fantasies of becoming a marine biologist and studied abroad in the Caribbean. That's me with a lemon shark. And sort of continue to solidify my love of ocean things. Though being from the Pacific Northwest, I had always loved the ocean. And while at Tufts, as Colin mentioned, I was really involved with the Tufts Wilderness Orientation and the Tufts Mountain Club, both of which I'm pretty sure are still around. Great, amazing. And so my first job after graduating was leading backpacking trips. And then made my way back to Seattle, where I had 2 part-time jobs. One of them was teaching classes at REI, and the other was doing some salmon habitat restoration work. And I loved both of these jobs, but sort of kept feeling like I needed to do more with my degree from Tufts, and I needed to sort of push myself to do a little more. And my boss at this environmental scientist job encouraged me to go to grad school so that I could advance my career. So I got my master's at the University of Washington in their Marine Affairs program, which again was a combination science policy program, because I realized after taking some time off between undergrad and grad school that, I really was meant to be at that intersection of science and policy, and I couldn't pick between them, and that was okay. And there, again, I focused on the Arctic and learned Inuktitut, got to spend a lot of time going up to Alaska and sort of really starting to understand the people science policy interaction. But one of the main issues of the time when I was in grad school was the issue of pebble mine. So how many people here are familiar with pebble mine? Okay, so 2, 4 hands maybe. So pebble mine was a proposed gold and copper mine at the headwaters of the most productive salmon run in the world up in Bristol Bay, Alaska. So it was sort of this classic big industry trying to move it into this deeply important ecological place. And this made me really mad. It was sort of my first time really deeply experiencing what I'll describe as rage fuel. And I was really upset about this. And this sort of spurred me to go do a 1-year fellowship in Washington, D.C., where I worked on a committee in the Senate. Specifically, I worked for the Democrats on an ocean subcommittee working on these issues, and really got to see the legislative process and learn how bills become laws, and essentially learned how to do things like stop projects like Pebble Mine from happening. And one piece that I will add into this story from talking right before this lecture, does that feedback me? No. Okay, no problem. I was like, oh no. Was I had done an internship when I was at Tufts at an environmental nonprofit. It was with Environment Oregon, and I hated it. And apparently in my exit, summary thing that I sent to Coco, I wrote that I would never work at an environmental nonprofit because it was not for me. Advocacy was not my thing. Which brings me to where I am today. So that's Washington, D.C., where I work as a professional advocate in the environmental nonprofit space. So I was deeply wrong as I was leaving Tufts about sort of where that path would lead me. But I'll share a small anecdote. While I really didn't like that job, it did not play to my skill set. My supervisor for that job told me that someday I might make a really good lobbyist. And I was horrified by this. I thought that was a dirty thing. But a lot of what my job now is actually in that lobbying category. So she saw something in me that I didn't, even though it was in an internship that I didn't like. So that brings me to where I am today. So I work at the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm a senior manager in the Oceans program. And I've been here coming up on 5 years. And it's easily the best job that I've had. And so a little more on NRDC, and then I promise we'll get to Blake Plateau. So NRDC combines the power of more than 3 million members and online activists with the expertise of some 700 scientists, lawyers, and advocates to confront the climate crisis, protect the planet's wildlife and wild places, and ensure the rights of all people to clean air, clean water, and healthy communities. NRDC was the first national environmental group to really focus on legal action. So that's what we're most famous for, is we sue, and we sue a lot. The lawyers at NRDC were the folks that helped come up with and write the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. We defend bedrock environmental laws and push for science-based policy change. And not to totally date myself, but the first time that I had heard about NRDC was because of this guy in this show. If anyone here remembers How I Met Your Mother, Marshall Erickson wanted to work at NRDC and save the planet. So same organization. And at NRDC, I mentioned I'm on the oceans team. And what that means is my team works on everything from trying to stop new offshore oil and gas drilling. We work on responsible offshore wind development, protecting marine mammals, combating illegal fishing, pushing for climate-ready fisheries, and then the topic of today, which is about marine protected areas. And again, quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with marine protected areas? All right, a few more hands. Does someone want to give a quick, what's a marine protected area? What are we talking about? Anyone? One more second. All right, marine protected areas really varies, but sort of like a national park in the water with varying degrees of protection, depending on what we're talking about, but a piece of the ocean that we have set aside from commercial activity. So that brings us to this guy. When Biden came into office, he set a goal to conserve 30% of lands and waters by 2030, an initiative known as America the Beautiful. And so in order to safeguard a sufficient number of species to protect global biodiversity, including humanity, the late American biologist E.O. Wilson and a new generation of scientists, ecologists, and conservationists concluded that we need to set aside roughly half of the Earth's land and seas for nature, a principle known as half Earth. And so this science-based goal and the sort of setting aside 30% by 2030 is to make progress towards that science-based conservation goal. So it is in the context of that that my team has been looking very intentionally at where are some geographically diverse areas in the ocean that need protection. We've already protected in the US large swaths in the Pacific. There's a little area in the Atlantic that's protected, the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, which is super cool. Would love to talk to someone about that. But that brings us to Blake Plateau. So Blake Plateau really is a hidden treasure off the southeastern coast. It's a large submerged plateau off the outer continental shelf that runs from about North Carolina down to Florida. It sits in about 1,000 to 3,000 feet of water. And until really recently, very few people knew a lot about it. But just over the past 10 years, research expeditions by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and academic institutions have done comprehensive mapping of Blake Plateau. And what they found amazed them. This is a sonar scan of the Blake Plateau that revealed tens of thousands of structures sweeping across the landscape. And in the past couple of years, by using cameras and submersibles, the scientists verified that these rolling hills were actually ancient deep sea coral mounds that have been growing on the Blake Plateau for hundreds of thousands of years. And so by the time they finished the mapping in a study that was published in the very beginning of this year, they realized they had found the largest deep sea coral province on Earth, just hiding off of the coast of the Southeast U.S., which is really incredible. This is a globally significant ecosystem. The coral mounds are distributed across the plateau into these large formations that my team has taken to calling coral neighborhoods. So these polygons on this map here show some of the very distinct coral neighborhoods that have unique characteristics. And sort of despite this vast array of marine life, the southeast region of the US has some of the fewest marine protections, with less than 1% of waters in the southeast that are protected from commercial activities. So you might ask, what's so special about some of this deep sea coral and deep sea sponges? Though I think a lot of people in this room, outside of their inherent value, but scientists believe that as many as 66% of all coral species are deep sea species. And despite the fact that these corals live like 1.5 miles below the ocean and under incredible amounts of force. They are the source of some incredible medical discoveries, for example, contributing to new drugs that treat everything from cancer to heart disease to Alzheimer's. I'm sure you've heard that one of the medicines used to treat COVID-19 came from a sea sponge. And some of these deep sea corals and sponges have produced scientific and technological innovations. Like there's a new study about like human bone things they're discovering from deep sea corals. It's fascinating. They're also incredibly beautiful. So one of the most striking features on the Blake Plateau is the largest contiguous deep sea coral reef that we've called the Million Mounds. And it's essentially a coral highway that runs about 200 miles from Georgia to Central Florida. And it's a thriving deep sea ecosystem hosting like 80,000 Lophelia coral mounds. And Lophelia is a coral species that is naturally a ghostly white. This is very healthy coral. Because it lives so deep in the ocean and without sunlight, it doesn't have the same symbiotic relationship with algae like tropical shallow corals do. So this is a picture of a very, very healthy reef. And much of Blake Plateau is still unexplored. So I think there are far more incredible discoveries that await us. The forests, these coral forests support an incredibly diverse community of unusual deep sea creatures like this purple soft coral, sea pens, like this and then over 100 species of fish, like this adorable red anglerfish, as well as that's a deep sea lizardfish, along with octopuses, squids, sponges, and even commercially valuable species like the golden crab. It truly is like a wondrous place. And in addition to having all of these cool creatures, scientists believe that the Blake Plateau is likely going to be a climate refuge, as our oceans are sort of, as we know, absorbing a lot of heat from the atmosphere, becoming more acidic, waters are warmer. Because the Blake Plateau is so deep and so cold, they think that it's going to be a refuge for corals, both regionally and globally, because of the scale and diversity of this area. And what's sort of unique about Blake Plateau is in the scientists' discovery of this area, it's in pretty good shape. It's pretty healthy. It is not sort of an immediately stressed ecosystem that is, something we sort of need to rehabilitate. It's doing really well, which is sort of a rare find for us these days. Oh, and they also have really cool chemosynthetic communities. Like this is a mussel bed feeding off of bacteria. They get their energy source from the methane seeping through the Earth's crust. It's just incredibly cool. And although the Blake Plateau part, the corals are all at the bottom of the sea, we're not just interested in protecting the seabed. We're talking about the entire water column because of the Gulf Stream. So Gulf Stream, strong current that sweeps across Blake Plateau that brings sort of life and productivity across, well, lots of places, but right now the Southeast. And we know that deep sea coral provides incredible habitat, but it also provides a really cool service in the production of critical nutrients for marine life on the surface. So the white corals we saw, the Lophelia coral, they house bacteria on the outside of their bodies that can process waste into nitrate, which is an essential nutrient for phytoplankton. And because of these strong currents in the Gulf, there's sort of this, I think I have another slide, an incredible nutrient cycling process that is happening in this area. And currents from the Gulf bring these to the surface, fueling productivity, which brings us to the surface. So there's large fish like swordfish and marlin. A lot of sea turtles spend their sort of early life and teenage years in some of the sargassum that tends to be on top of the Blake Plateau. And there's seafaring birds that forage. It really is sort of a really incredible connected ecosystem from the seafloor all the way to the surface. And again, recent research has shown the sort of nutrient factory concept for Blake Plateau. And the sort of marine snow drifting down and nutrients coming back up, which is really incredible. So I've now talked at you about why Blake Plateau is cool. I'm going to attempt to show you a really short video. And the video has recordings of scientists as they are down exploring the Blake Plateau, and you sort of are hearing their live reactions of what they're seeing. I've watched this video a million times. It's incredible. So we're gonna see if I can make it work. Fingers crossed. Maybe not. Not like it. Escape and try again or come back to it.
Oh, so it has the link here.
Hang on, folks. We'll get the video in just, I promise it's worth it. It's only 4 minutes, but the video sort of conveys like how truly incredible this place is in a way that my pictures and talking at you can't quite do. And it's not just this grumpy fish, I promise. Can we just play it from YouTube? All right, well, I can keep chatting. If we hang tight, everyone. YouTube. Oops. That's not it. Yes. I'm just looking for the link to the video. Oop. Uh-oh. We're trying. Oh. All right, maybe we'll come back to the video. Maybe we'll come back to it. It is really worth seeing. So maybe we'll figure out how we can do it at the end, maybe. But what the video shows is, you know, you see the submersibles going down and sort of see them like coming upon these like incredible coral mounds and this like amazing diversity of marine life. In a way that's just really exciting. So maybe at the end of it, we will get to force you all to watch it. All right, back to presenting. Well, my hope with the video was to sort of finish solidifying that like the Blake Plateau is scientifically like super cool and really exciting. But that's only like half of the story here. And so, you know, as NRDC, we had been talking with scientists and learning about this area, and we're sort of, you know, amazed by what we are finding. And what we tend to do in these types of campaigns when we're sort of thinking about like, should this be the area that we try and protect? One of the first things we do is we go down to the region and start talking to the community and sort of figure out what do they know? What is the history here? Who are the people involved? Because the only way that you can successfully protect something is by having community support that sort of filters up to state level, that filters up to the federal level, which is where I work at the federal level. So we go down to the state and we meet with some of our partners. Here we go. And one of the first partners that we went to meet with down in the region was the Gullah Geechee Nation. which is a like Black indigenous people that live along the coast of the Southeast. And we've worked with their chiefess, a remarkable, oh my God, it worked. I'm so excited. We'll have to wait for Queen Quet. We'll get to her in a second. Maybe.
Man, the excitement. Yeah.
All right.
Given the proximity of so many millions of people that live along the southeast coast, it seems that, of course, this area would be very well known and we would know exactly where everything is. And that's so not true.
Are you ready to continue to send? We are out on the Blake Plateau off the coast of the southeast United States, ranging essentially from Cape Hatteras all the way down to the Bahama Banks off the coast of Florida.
Previously to the Okeanos coming out here and mapping more of this flat part of the Blake Plateau, this was all kind of originally just thought to be soft sediment. But these mound features really do shed light on how prolific these polar coral communities are. One thing I think we could talk about a little bit is how the live coral is actually white in this type of environment. So these are actually live and healthy. I'm not speechless, obviously, because I keep talking, but this is, for me, really, really exciting.
The Million Mounds region is what we think is the largest continuous deep sea coral ecosystem discovered thus far on Earth. We're talking about an area about 7 million acres.
There's been very little exploration work out here. I think we're the first deep submergence vehicles that have actually been able to dive on this amazing feature. So it's really exciting to be out here today.
These mounds are made through hundreds of thousands of years of coral growing. They have cored down to the bottom of one of these, and at the base of it, in the core, it was over 1 million years old.
What we see when we look at the Gulf Stream, there's a very tight correlation where you see the most dense coral mounds and the healthiest mounds, and where the Gulf Stream is strongest. The coral mounds influence the biodiversity of the seafloor by basically providing habitat structure. So a lot of things in the deep sea that we observe, they don't always have a place to settle in soft sediment that's moving around. They like to attach to something hard. So those coral mounds provide a great habitat upon which other things can grow. And that's where we tend to see a lot of the biology that we're interested in.
We keep finding these mounds, we keep finding these ridges, we keep finding these scarps that have evidence of life that was previously unknown to be there. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh my goodness, it's a wall of coral. Look at that. Oh my goodness gracious. This is so rare to be able to see something like this. He's huge. Look at this. This is 1.5 meters, at least, if not 2. He's humongous. Wow. Oh. The beauty of these seascapes gives them an appreciation that you can't read about it and feel attached to it or understand its beauty and fragility like you can when you actually see it. They used to think there was no life at the bottom of the ocean. Boy, were they wrong. You really want?
Can you see why I wanted to show it? Such a good video. All right, coming back to the human side of this. So we're looking for areas that might need protection that are really like biologically and ecologically special. And so then our sort of next step in like, how do we make this work is go down to the region, talk to people, one of our first conversations, Gullah Geechee, was with their chiefess, a woman named Queen Quet. And we were like, Queen Quet, like they've discovered this like incredible, biodiverse area like off of the coast. Like, what is your history on this? What do you know about it? And her response to us was like, of course we know about this, like obviously. And then shared that the waters of Blake Plateau were sacred. And we were like, what do you mean by that? And so this sort of comes to the larger human history of the area. So as people, we often view the ocean sort of as this featureless and transient surface upon which people have acted but haven't really left a trace. But what's sort of fascinating is when we come down to the seafloor, that the human activities are imprinted then on the seafloor of the area. And some of these maritime impacts are everything from lines on charts. This is an old chart of the Gulf Stream, but also shipwrecks and other pieces. And the Blake Plateau was really one of the final areas as part of the Middle Passage. So the forced migration of Africans captured and brought to the U.S. for the purposes of the slave trade. And the Blake Plateau area was where a lot of people both died and where bodies were dumped, sort of as part of the transatlantic slave trade. And so the remnants of these people, their bones, teeth, and other material artifacts are now encrusted and concreted in the deep sea coral reefs of Blake Plateau. So it marks Blake Plateau as a graveyard, as well as this biologically and ecologically rich area, but has made the waters of Blake Plateau a sacred place to the Gullah Geechee Nation. For the Gullah Geechee, who are descendants of African and indigenous tribes, I've got a quote from Queen Quet that I think puts it really beautifully. She says, "The resting place where the blood and bones of Gullah Geechee ancestors have contributed to the growth of this tremendous ecological area." So they, in their tradition, sort of firmly believe in it's sort of a concept of like this horrible trauma and tragedy that has turned into this sort of regrowth, rebirth type of area. And it symbolizes sort of the possibility of new life emerging from something that is so horrible. And what we have learned by talking with the Gullah Geechee and Queen Quet, as well as many others, is that the ocean has memory, and the Blake Plateau has this ancestral memory. It has the memory of resistance and resilience, cultural heritage, and many people feel very spiritually connected to the Blake Plateau. And in a lot of the marine conservation work that we do, we don't often find something like this that has this deep, rich human connection. And so this is really long, but I'll try and be quick, read from you the words of Queen Quet herself so that you're hearing what she says about it versus my interpretation. So it says, in the Gullah Geechee Nation, the proverb, "De water bring we and de water going to take we back," is often heard. Wading back in the water to face the motherland from which many of the ancestors of the native Gullah Geechees came would require a trip across Blake Plateau. As explorers seek to find the shipwrecks of enslavement vessels or seek to lay underwater tributes to ancestors who didn't survive the crossing of what is referred to as the Middle Passage, imagine coming to see creatures that are akin to the Gullah Geechee indigenous traditions throughout the sea islands. Just off our coast, the tuna and the shark ride the Gulf Stream current, the same vital force that was ridden by vessels for decades. Amidst the sargassum seaweed meadows swim baby fish that are a part of the Gullah Geechee cuisine. This space serves as a nursery, not only for them, but for the turtles that at some point will emerge like ancestral spirits from the water of the Atlantic and leave their imprints and sometimes their tears in the sands of the sea island shorelines, which is just beautifully put. And so learning this history from the Gullah Geechee, we had an opportunity to build a really unique coalition of people that care about Blake Plateau. So we started with ourselves and the Gullah Geechee Nation and expanded to A lot of local conservation groups, we really, as a big national group, want this to be something that really comes from the community and is not sort of imposed by a big federal group. So partnered with folks like the Carolina Ocean Alliance, Georgia Conservancy, and then you'll note on here, there's also Creation Justice Ministries and the Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. And this was sort of a unique opportunity as we began sort of being in the Southeast, particularly South Carolina and Georgia. We started going to some local parishes and church groups and talking with pastors, and sort of found a really deep interest from the broader interfaith community in Blake Plateau. A quote from one of the Baptist pastors that we've been working with is, "The Blake Plateau offers a unique opportunity to honor both the creator's design and the legacy of Black struggle, survival, and flourishing." So they sort of bring in their own faith into this area that they sort of describe as, a place of biblical proportions that needs protections and connects to our own US history and helps tell part of a story that in the US we're not always very good at telling. And I'll say, as a non-religious person myself, this was like not an angle I had thought of in my advocacy. We often partner with mostly environmental groups, sometimes we find unique partnerships, but this is sort of a really new take on how we're approaching trying to conserve this. So what is our sort of goal in building this coalition of people that care about this area? We're looking for effective and durable protections for a network of ecological areas in the federal waters. So you can see these distinct polygons on this map represent some of the distinct coral neighborhoods that I mentioned that we want to protect. And you can also see we've got a designation on this map of where the Gullah Geechee land is. So the campaign vision has really evolved from a pure focus on the ecological reasons why this place needs to be protected to also sort of tell the story of this, our own, indigenous and cultural history of this area. And so question here for folks, does anyone have ideas on, if we're trying to protect this place, what are we trying to protect it from? Any ideas? Yeah. Yep, developers, people trying to buy the land. I'm just repeating so people online can hear. Other ideas, what are we worried about?
People who want to mine the nodules that are at the bottom using some strip mining, yeah.
Bingo, yes. We're super worried about deep sea mining in the area. The Blake Plateau has tons of manganese nodules that are lying amidst the coral formations and in this area. Other ideas on what we might be trying to protect it from? We've got 2 so far. What else happens deep in the ocean? Yeah. Deep sea fishing, exactly. I saw a hand back there. Oh, nailed it, yes. So we're worried about deep sea mining, offshore drilling. There's new conversations around carbon capture and sequestration in the seabed, bottom trawling and other destructive fishing practices. There's also new conversations from some tech startups that are looking at trying to capture the energy from the Gulf Stream, which sounds really cool, but depending on how that's done, could have dire consequences for a fragile ecosystem like the Blake Plateau. And I bring this up because when we're trying to protect something, it's always like, what are we protecting it from? And this is where I will sort of put on my political hat a little bit more and note that elections have consequences. And sort of we're at a unique point with the Blake Plateau where these industries have yet to take root in this area. There have been proposals for offshore drilling that we've been able to beat back. Deep sea mining is going to come, but it's not here yet. So we're sort of at this unique moment in time to sort of protect these deep sea coral reefs and ancestral burial grounds before industry comes in. So what are we trying to get here? So our policy goal is to provide permanent protections for a network of discrete areas, and then support a national marine sanctuary overlay. Does anyone have ideas of tools that we have in the US to permanently protect areas? You can do sort of think like land areas too. Any ideas? What do we do to protect areas? Bears ears, anyone? Yeah. National monument, exactly. So we want a monument designation. We want a marine monument for the Blake Plateau for those discrete areas. And then the vision is once we have a marine monument for these very discrete areas, we'd then love to go and add an overlay of a marine sanctuary on top of that to sort of protect and sort of connect them all. Because as much as we would love to sort of, section off the entire Blake Plateau from commercial activity, that is not politically viable. So we are going for a piecemeal approach. So some of our strategies are to demonstrate support from these faith-based organizations, environmental organizations, and community organizations. And then the second part is to secure congressional leader support. And that's really where I come in because I am based in Washington, D.C. So in this campaign, we've worked with the scientists, found this area. We've worked with community partners, have got their support and learned more about the larger story of why this place matters. And then my job comes in where we take this support and we try and turn it into action from Congress and from the White House. And so right now in this campaign, spoiler, story's not over. We are trying, I work a lot with the White House and members of Congress to try and get this to happen. So our ask right now is to get some senators to send a letter to President Biden asking for protections of this place. We know that President Biden's staff love this. So this story is gold. You got people, biology, this is amazing, but we need the political support to do it, which is where sort of these key faith leaders and other pieces come in. And you might ask, is this popular? Do people like it? What's the vibe? It's really popular. So we did some polling down, particularly in Georgia and South Carolina, and notably, regardless of political party, more than 80% of people supported protecting this area, which is kind of remarkable given today's political climate. The top reasons people want to protect it was endangered species, as well as the coral piece. And then I think a really beautiful part is this last piece, that more than 3/4 of the Black voters that we polled found the area's legacy as a cultural landmark to be a really convincing reason for protection. So sort of tying, everything from endangered species to coral to our own cultural history was why we wanted to protect this place. And so we sort of have this unique opportunity right now to try and protect this seascape before these harmful commercial industries come in. And I'm going to stop talking at you and make room for questions about Blake Plateau, the campaign, my career, NRDC, whatever would be most interesting or useful to you all.
Thank you, Valerie. If you have questions, I'm happy to bring the mic to you.
And if not, I'll just keep talking at you. So might as well ask me a question.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. It's so fun to hear the intersection of science and policy in this way. Having just my in-laws live in Florida, so I've been watching furiously all the newscast on Hurricane Milton. What are the consequences for hurricanes in this deep sea environment? Does the jet stream essentially mean it's not affected?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We haven't seen sort of the huge hurricane impact because of where Florida is really hit the key coral areas with the same magnitude. The thinking that I have heard, and I'd have to check with our chief scientist on this, is that it is so deep that a lot of the sort of hurricane stuff is more towards the surface, and so it's not as disturbed. But I will say politically, because this is the realm that I play in, we're having a really hard time. We were this close to getting a congressional letter asking for this to try and get this done before Biden leaves office. And then this sort of 1-2 punch of these hurricanes come in, have taken all of the political wind. And everyone has to focus on this disaster response because of course they do. It is more important than me ranting about deep sea corals. But the sort of politics of all these hurricanes means that there's less appetite to do some of these bigger conservation actions. So it does still connect, and we're talking with staffers, and we can't do it right now because optics and bandwidth.
That was super interesting. One thing that you mentioned that I was curious about is you mentioned carbon sequestration and how obviously if we look at current funding initiatives in the federal government, there's a lot of money being thrown in that direction. And thinking about lobbying, like how are you working, I guess, I don't want to say with, but just like around that issue, because obviously that's also kind of like a green centric approach, but it's against what you're working towards. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'll be totally honest. In my current position at NRDC, my team is really nervous about like seabed carbon sequestration and storage. And so I'll give an example. There is a new rulemaking that's going to be coming out of BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, as directed by Congress. So new regulations about doing carbon sequestration in the ocean. And we are getting involved in that federal process to try and make sure that it can't be connected to things like extended oil recovery, to get more oil out of existing oil wells. And we are sort of doing what we can to, you know, we talk about like code of ethics and like how to do this safely. And, you know, my hope is like this doesn't happen anytime soon, because we're trying to put up as many roadblocks as we can until we know more. And there's areas where it is totally needed, but I think the risks, especially given how little we know about a lot of these deep sea environments, are really high. And I'll note while you hand that over, this is a piece of art that we had an artist do for us of the Blake Plateau from sort of like seafloor to seabed. We've been working with lots of artists and it's been so fun.
Thank you so much for this lecture. I'm very curious, when you're trying to drum up political support and endorsements from politicians, what are the biggest challenges you face and the biggest opposition you face?
Yeah, excellent question. I'll answer the opposition question first because it's really easy. Our biggest opposition is fishermen. A lot of commercial fishermen sort of view the entire ocean as available to them. And when we start telling them areas that they can't go, they get really upset. Despite the fact that in the Blake Plateau area and those polygons on that map are not areas where there is massive commercial fishing. We very intentionally are sort of trying to avoid that fight with them. But there is still this sense that like if you block it off, that's not fair. So the commercial fishing industry is our sort of biggest obstacle. I will say so far on this campaign, that's sort of our biggest obstacle. Everyone else has been like pretty thrilled about this. They've been like, this is super cool. We talked to the ports in Georgia and South Carolina and they were like, love it, sounds great. The recreational fishermen are like, super cool, like that's so neat. So like mostly going well, minus the like commercial fishermen. And they haven't like lost their marbles on this yet. But that is, I will say, like as NRDC, so going back to the monument thing, we're trying to get them to designate a monument. And then what we do is that monument will probably get challenged in court by someone that doesn't like it. And then we step in and help defend it. So we've been fighting some lawsuits from fishermen in New England about a marine monument up in New England. I guess we're in New England now. I'm never in New England. A marine monument around here. And then I didn't answer the like other part of your question. How do we build political support? It depends on the member. So this is where it's like really, I think this part's really fun. It's like, okay, who is this member? What do they care about? Who's close to them? Like what's their angle? What's their thing? And then we try and get the right people in to talk to them, package it in a way that's appealing. So like Senator Warnock of Georgia comes from the faith community. And so pulling in some of these Baptist faith leaders is part of our way to try and get Senator Warnock to care more about this. Whereas Senator Ossoff, the other senator in Georgia, cares more about like national parks and conservation. And so with him, we're like, this could be part of your conservation legacy. Like, let's create a marine national park. We're going to get, research dollars into universities in the area to study it, which is what happened in New England. There's been an influx of money through the New England Aquarium and Mystic Aquarium to study the Northeast Canyons and seamounts. And so that's sort of an angle we'll take with Ossoff's office versus Warnock's office, if that answers your question.
Hi, thank you for your talk today. I really enjoyed it. Something I'm curious about is now, especially within environmental politics in the government, there's a huge political divide. And I'm curious as if to your organization or other environmental organizations in the government, if you're going to continue to focus on more ideas that like the polls that we saw with Georgia voters had a huge consensus over protection of these areas. Do you think that using these polls to decide where you want to focus on and where the most consensus is will be politically beneficial to more easily passing these environmental goals in Congress?
That's a really great question. And I think the answer is going to depend on which environmental nonprofit we're talking about. So NRDC has the luxury, we've been around since 1970. And we luckily don't just have to work on the things that are most politically viable. So I spend a lot of my time working on offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, which I can tell you right now, not politically popular in the Gulf of Mexico. Likelihood of winning on that one, really small, but we fight that anyways. So it's really exciting for us when we have things that, you know, we could potentially get bipartisan support and poll really well, but it doesn't determine what we work on. We sort of set out a larger strategic vision. I know with my team, our chief scientists, there's what are the biggest threats to the ocean? And how can we as a national environmental advocacy group have the most impact? And we sort of pick our things that way. Some of the issues I work on, I'll say this Congress, you know, likelihood of me getting a bill that makes new climate ready fishery policy, not gonna happen. But we're still working on it. Other things like illegal fishing, there's a lot more bipartisan support. I'm getting some language in legislative bills that are gonna pass. So it's a yes and, but doesn't determine what we work on.
We have a question online.
Yeah, so the question is, what would happen to the Blake Plateau if the Gulf Stream shut down due to climate disruption?
Excellent, it would be bad. I don't have a full answer, but that would be pretty disastrous given the connectivity between the ocean floor and the surface. I mean, if the Gulf Stream shuts down, we are in way more trouble than just the Blake Plateau, as you all know. That would be disastrous. And I know the Gulf Stream is slowing down, and that's been in the news. I will say some of the science on that is a little overblown. If there's a whole bunch of papers, I went on a deep dive on this, but it would be really bad.
I'm just going to step in here because you saying that I went on to do a deep dive. One of the things that I've noticed in our conversations is that your insatiable appetite for learning. What does a deep dive look like for you when you find yourself in a rabbit hole, and how do you get out of it?
Oh, great question. I mean, that's one of the fun parts of my job is I mostly work with lawyers, but also some scientists. And I have a really incredible team. That's my just find a good manager and you will be happy. And you know, my team is, I'm I've got questions about this. They're great. Why don't you spend the next week going through it and then type up your notes for us? And so sometimes it means reading, going back and reading, you know, scientific articles. Sometimes I'll confess, I just write we have a science center at NRDC, and I'll write them, be hi, can you help me find, you know, I need more on deep sea mining and impacts to blah, blah, blah. And they'll sort of point me in the right direction. But a lot of the nature of my job is I'm more of a generalist than a specialist. So I only get to go so deep for so long before I need to sort of be broad. But I find if I don't have the time to do the deep dive myself, I can ask someone to help me do it, which is really great. Being on a team is the best. Go ahead.
You mentioned on more of the projects that are less politically popular, a little bit of a harder battle. How do you and your team kind of, I don't know, I guess stay motivated or stay positive and into it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually one that comes up a lot. I was talking with Colin this morning. Some of the folks I manage were coming to me. We were doing a campaign on offshore drilling, trying to advocate for no new offshore oil and gas leasing. And we were working on this campaign and building support and getting, you know, doing all the things. And, you know, I was really honest with my team. I was we're not going to win this one. And they were hold on, why are we doing this if we know we're not going to win? I'm because we are going to gain some political ground, and we are playing the 20-year game, not the 2-year or 3-year or 5-year game. And so I'm reluctant to use military analogies, but we're going to lose the battle, but we might win the war. But in sort of the staying positive, you know, I'm very much a pragmatist. And so believe my sort of theory of change, I believe in sort of small actionable steps that can happen. And so when I look at our work, say on offshore drilling, we were not successful in getting no new offshore oil and gas leasing, but we went from 11 lease sales down to 3, which is pretty good. And we also, again, come back to litigation. We sue pretty much, at least in the past 5 years that I've been at NRDC, we've litigated on every offshore oil and gas lease sale, and we've won most of those cases. And so like, we might not get the big thing that we asked for, but we are making progress. We recently stopped a lease sale in Cook Inlet, Alaska, which is really exciting. So that lease sale is not gonna go forward. And it's one lease sale, that's not everything, but it's sort of the death by 1,000 cuts. And we look for, I'll say offshore drilling because that's my most depressing area of work. We also look at other ways like, okay, we're not going to be able to stop all new offshore oil and gas leasing. Can we make it more expensive? Can we make the hurdles harder for it to happen? Can we, go after them because they have to do seismic testing to figure out where it is? Can we sort of come at it that way? And so we are constantly creatively looking for ideas to slow things down or stop them, even if our first choice option doesn't work. But I'd also say some of the work is depressing. We use a lot of humor. We have a really good vacation policy, which I know people are gonna laugh, but it makes a really big difference to take time off and go to the places you love and remember why you're fighting to protect all of these things. So the sort of being a human side of it, I think NRDC takes good care of us because otherwise, I've seen friends burn out in the climate movement. And we try really hard not to do that. But some days are, worse than others.
Well, that is a great place to wrap up. Thank you for your presentation. Will you please join me in thanking Valerie Cleland?